The morning they mocked him, Wyatt Mercer didn't say a single word. The Cedar Falls auction yard was filled with men who thought they knew the exact value of everything they saw.
It's barely worth half that.
Wyatt stood alone in his canvas jacket, a quiet man driven by a specific, unseen purpose. He raised his hand 6 times, bidding steadily for 6 rusted machines that nobody else wanted. $14,200 for peeling iron and dead engines.
The hydraulics might still work. It's worth the risk.
He looked at the broken chassis and saw exactly the framework he needed to build his empire. Chloe Vance leaned against her luxury SUV, watching him with a cold, calculating amusement. She made sure her sharp voice carried easily across the damp, foggy lot.
Now, about lot number 3.
The man just spent his last dime on junk, she said. The crowd's laughter immediately followed her words. Wyatt didn't look back or defend himself. He simply hooked the chains and pulled his future away in silence. The drive back to his property was quiet, accompanied only by the heavy grinding of rusted metal on the trailer. The town of Harlo Creek had already made up its mind about Wyatt Mercer. A struggling man making foolish choices, that was the narrative they preferred to tell over their morning coffee. From the county road, his property looked exactly as they expected, a tired farmhouse wrapped in quiet neglect. But the dilapidated exterior was a deliberate choice, a carefully maintained camouflage for what lay hidden behind the tree line. Wyatt pulled the heavy iron frames toward a massive, newly constructed structure at the far edge of the property. He unhooked the chains and dragged the machines inside, letting the heavy steel doors slide shut. The mocking whispers of the town were locked outside. He flipped a breaker switch on the wall. Rows of brilliant LED lights flooded a massive concrete floor. It was not a barn, but a pristine, high-tech fabrication lab. He stood before the 6 rusted hulls in the fluorescent stillness, not as a broken farmer, but as an engineer ready to dissect his prey. For the next 2 weeks, Wyatt stripped the dead machines down to their structural core. He didn't care about the peeling paint, he cared about the integrity of the iron chassis. On his monitors, 3D CAD models rotated in perfect geometric harmony, outlining the future of the farm. With quiet precision, he mounted silver multi-array GPS sensors onto the rusted hoods. The days bled into nights, driven by a relentless focus that required no audience and sought no approval. Across town, inside a sleek, modern office, Chloe Vance sat wrapped in a different kind of calculation. She traced a manicured finger over a county zoning map, her eyes locked on the 340 acres registered to Wyatt Mercer. To her, the land was a logistical goldmine wasted on a broken man.
I have a feeling
She picked up the phone. Back in the fluorescent quiet of the lab, a hydraulic system hummed to life with a clean, electric pulse. Wyatt stood at his terminal, watching as the first iron hull moved an inch forward, entirely on its own. The next morning, Chloe Vance met with Carter Voss at the most exclusive restaurant in the county.
It's the fallout.
Carter was a developer from Des Moines, a man who built his fortune by convincing people to surrender what they loved. He laid a leather-bound portfolio on the table, detailing a massive regional distribution hub. The geographic center of that highly lucrative infrastructure project sat directly on top of Wyatt Mercer's farm. Carter spoke of lowball offers and relentless pressure, framing them as standard and unavoidable business practices. Chloe listened with a predatory grace, slowly swirling the expensive red wine in her crystal glass. She didn't just want the economic boom for her town, she wanted to prove Wyatt was exactly the fool she claimed. A silent agreement passed between them, a firm handshake of implied threats and bureaucratic leverage. She implicitly promised to weaponize the zoning board, wrapping their greed in the polite language of civic duty. As they toasted, Wyatt's defeat seemed not just inevitable, but merely a quiet matter of paperwork. The following Tuesday, Carter Voss found Wyatt Mercer at a local coffee shop. Carter introduced himself with the practiced ease of a man used to getting exactly what he wanted. He framed his lowball offer as a favor, a generous exit strategy for a struggling single father. He spoke without pause for 4 minutes, layering corporate jargon over thinly veiled threats. Wyatt sat perfectly still, holding his coffee cup, letting the developer exhaust his rehearsed pitch. His expression communicated absolutely nothing beyond a cold, measured attentiveness. When Carter finally finished, expecting quiet submission, Wyatt held his gaze for a long moment. "No, thank you," Wyatt said softly, setting his cup down on the wooden table. He offered no elaboration and no counteroffer, deliberately stripping Carter of any conversational leverage. As Wyatt walked out into the morning air, Carter sat alone, realizing his most comfortable tool had just failed. The formal notice arrived at Wyatt's address on a Wednesday by registered mail. It came from the Harlo Creek Commerce and Zoning Advisory Board, citing concerns regarding unauthorized land use. Wyatt read it at the kitchen table, the cold morning light washing over the stark black ink. It requested an on-site inspection within 14 days and bore the unmistakable signature of Chloe Vance. He read it twice, then set it flat on the table, treating it like a document he intended to address on his own terms. Marcus, his 16-year-old son, came downstairs a few minutes later, moving with quiet caution. The boy saw the official crest on the paper and the careful neutrality on his father's face. "They're not going to make us leave, are they?" Marcus asked, his voice carefully leveled to hide the worry. Wyatt looked at the boy, recognizing the weight of the question. "No," he said without hesitation. "We're not leaving." That evening, Wyatt walked into his study and dialed his corporate attorney in Chicago, ready to rewrite the rules of engagement. Chloe Vance hosted a community meeting that Thursday, framing it as a transparency initiative for the concerned public. In reality, it was a carefully orchestrated performance designed to weaponize the town's unease against Wyatt Mercer. Standing at the podium, her blonde hair catching the hall lights, she spoke of safety protocols and hidden dangers. She fed them leading questions without providing actual answers, allowing their imaginations to fill in the dark blanks. The local residents, already suspicious of Wyatt's rusted tractors, murmured in agreement, easily swayed by her polished delivery. Diana Brooks, a seasoned local journalist, sat in the back row, silently recording the manipulated anger in her notebook. Diana had covered Harlo Creek long enough to recognize when a narrative was being artificially steered toward a predetermined verdict. While the town hall echoed with manufactured outrage, Wyatt was nowhere near the building to defend his name. Instead, he stood in his isolated workshop, meticulously fitting a custom motherboard into the chassis of the fourth machine. He let them talk, completely unbothered, knowing that the loudest voices in the room held absolutely no power over him. The morning after the town hall, Diana Brooks decided to pull the thread that had been bothering her since the auction. She walked into the county recorder's office, bypassing the local gossip to seek the cold, hard truth of public records. She requested the full land ownership index for the Northern Agricultural Corridor, digging through years of mundane filings. It took her 2 hours of meticulous tracing through corporate registries and property tax assignments. What she found made her sit perfectly still in the quiet archives, her pen hovering over her notebook. Wyatt Mercer personally held the 340 acres, which the entire town already knew. But 3 separate holding companies, all registered quietly in Iowa over the past 3 years, pointed back to him. They held 6 additional, contiguous parcels of land, masking a massive, unified agricultural grid. Combined, Wyatt did not own a struggling family farm, he silently controlled just under 1,800 acres. Diana stared at the staggering number, realizing the town wasn't just wrong about the man, they were blind to his empire. That afternoon, Diana found Samuel Grant in his cramped office behind the auction yard. The old auctioneer had run distressed farm liquidations for 3 decades, developing a sharp instinct for men with secrets. She asked him directly if he had known who Wyatt Mercer really was before the day of the auction.
I've told you everything I know.
Samuel looked at her with the quiet patience of a man who had been waiting for someone smart enough to ask. "Do you know what those 6 tractors are worth if you know how to look at them?" he asked softly.
We must handle the bidding carefully.
He didn't wait for an answer. He stood, walked to an old metal filing cabinet, and opened the second drawer. He retrieved a glossy trade journal published 18 months prior, setting it on the desk in front of her. The headline read, "Mercer Precision AG, The Quiet Revolution," accompanied by an aerial photograph of the farm. Diana stared at the article, reading about synchronized autonomous machines and multi-million-dollar technology. Samuel took a slow sip of his tea, looking out the window, content that the truth was finally out. The morning of the inspection was clear and cool, carrying the specific quality of patience finally rewarded. Chloe Vance arrived at the Mercer gate at exactly 9 o'clock in an official county vehicle. She stepped out in a sharp blazer, accompanied by 2 zoning board members who looked entirely convinced of their own authority. Carter Voss arrived 2 minutes later in a black sedan, introduced smoothly as a regional land use consultant. They stood at the closed wire gate, looking past the rusted chains with an air of smug anticipation. Wyatt came down the gravel lane on foot, completely unhurried, wearing the same canvas work pants as always. He unlatched the heavy gate, offering no defensive posture and no apologies. He shook hands with Chloe, acknowledging her with the straightforward neutrality of one adult to another. He shook Carter's hand last, holding the developer's gaze for a half-second longer than necessary. Wyatt said absolutely nothing about their transparent ambush. He simply turned and led the inspection party up the long drive. They came around the last stand of low trees at the bend in the gravel lane.
Chloe, and the yield projections look even better.
The property opened before them all at once, stripping away the careful illusion of neglect. What they saw was not what any of them had prepared themselves to find. Chloe stopped walking. The smug anticipation drained entirely from her face. The inspection party stood at the threshold of 1,800 acres of precision-managed farmland. Silver sensor poles rose at regular intervals across the fields, catching the morning light at their tips. In the eastern section, 3 modified tractors moved along parallel routes with deliberate, robotic steadiness. There was no one in the cabs. Just 3 converted hulls moving in absolute geometric order. Carter Voss went completely still, his eyes locked on a massive greenhouse and a sleek operations building in the distance. It was the specific stillness of a man realizing his numbers had just arrived at a devastatingly wrong conclusion. Wyatt led them toward the sleek operations building, his stride unbroken by their shock. He opened the side door, guiding the inspection party into a single room of approximately 800 square feet. It was cool and softly lit, lined along the north wall with 24 active monitoring screens. The displays showed live sensor feeds, weather overlays, equipment GPS positions, and commodity inventory tracking. Chloe stepped inside, her sharp eyes scanning the pristine workstations and the color printer humming in the corner. Wyatt walked to the center table and picked up a thick, blue-covered folder that had been waiting there. He didn't offer it to Carter or Chloe individually. He simply set it flat on the table, open for everyone to read. Page 1 was an agricultural innovation land use permit, issued 23 months ago. It bore the undeniable signatures of both county and state reviewers, proving everything was entirely legal. Page 2 displayed an Environmental Protection Agency certification for the full subsurface sensor network. But it was page 10 that Wyatt allowed the inspection party to read in full without offering any commentary. It was a strategic partnership and licensing agreement between Mercer Precision AG and a major Minneapolis tech firm. The initial phase value was stated plainly and without ambiguity, $47 million. The combined valuation of the land, infrastructure, and licensed technology pushed the true worth of his empire past $100 million. The control room stayed completely quiet for a long time after that. Carter Voss was the first to speak, scrambling for the precise, careful language of a man trying not to drown. He mentioned corner case provisions, zoning layer ambiguities, and potential procedural delays. He made it sound highly technical, attempting to manufacture uncertainty where none existed. Wyatt listened to the desperate corporate jargon with the exact same closed, unhurried expression he had used at the coffee shop. When Carter finally ran out of breath, Wyatt simply looked at him, completely unbothered by the empty threats. Everything in that folder has been legal, permitted, and compliant for 2 years, Wyatt finally said. His voice was conversational, never raised, never performing the triumph he was fully entitled to claim. He let a beat pass, holding Carter's gaze with absolute, unyielding authority. My attorney in Chicago has been reviewing your recent acquisition filings in Cedar County for the past 3 weeks. He has questions for your legal team that I think you should be aware of before the end of the week.
You've lost everything.
Something changed in Carter's expression, the specific blankness of a man who just realized he was the prey. He picked up his jacket from the chair without saying a single word to the room. Wyatt watched him move toward the door, offering one final piece of quiet advice. If you want to do legitimate business in this region, have your firm contact my lawyer.
Until the objective is secured. That is an order.
Carter left without responding. The sound of his sedan starting outside was the last time anyone in Harlo Creek would hear it. Chloe stood near the monitoring wall after the others had filed out, entirely alone with her mistake. She looked at the screens, watching the sensor data scroll relentlessly across the active feeds. The tractor position markers updated as the 3 machines made their slow, perfect turns at the field boundary. A weather algorithm ran quietly in the background, scheduling irrigation without requiring a single human instruction. She looked at the blue folder still open on the center table, the $47 million signature staring back at her. Finally, she looked at Wyatt, who had moved to stand by the far window. He was looking out at his fields, wearing no particular expression, refusing to perform any version of triumph. He did not gloat, and he did not demand an apology. His silence was heavier than any insult. She stood there for a long moment, then turned and walked out without saying a single word. The drive back through the quiet county roads was the longest 40 minutes of Chloe Vance's professional life. Diana Brooks's article ran on Thursday morning in print and online under the headline, "The Farm Nobody Saw." It was 3,000 words, the longest piece the Harlo Creek Gazette had published in 4 years. It carried the aerial photograph of the massive high-tech agricultural grid on the front page. The text provided a full, irrefutable accounting of the property assembly through the LLC structures. It detailed the 3-year construction of the sensor networks and the $47 million partnership. Diana had independently verified the staggering $100 million total valuation before her editor hit print. The town received it the way small towns receive information that requires a fundamental reassessment of reality. Slowly at first, as newspapers were dropped onto driveways in the early morning mist. Then all at once, moving through the local diner like an invisible shockwave of realization. A particular quality of silence settled over the room, the sound of a community recognizing how profoundly wrong they had been. By mid-morning, the local diner was completely full, yet distinctly uncomfortable. The conversation filling the room had a specific, heavy texture, the texture of people trying to backtrack. The men who had laughed the hardest at the auction now stared awkwardly at their coffee cups. A few plainly admitted they had been wrong, their voices low and thick with embarrassment. Others found different framings, conveniently rewriting their memories to cast themselves as merely surprised observers. They had looked at a man's rusted truck and canvas boots and decided they already understood his full dimensions. They had stood in a field of evidence and chosen to see only worthless iron. They had watched a man refuse to explain himself and concluded he had nothing worth explaining. The echo of their cruelty from that April morning now followed them through every sentence of the article. In the corner booth, where Chloe Vance used to hold court, the leather seats remained conspicuously empty. 2 weeks later, a brief corporate statement was released by Carter Voss's development firm in Des Moines. It was a cold, carefully worded press release, announcing the indefinite suspension of their regional logistics project. They cited environmental reassessments and revised feasibility modeling, corporate code for total surrender. In a high-rise office in Chicago, Wyatt's attorney, Jonathan Reed, calmly closed a thick legal file on his desk. He had methodically dismantled Carter's legal framework, ensuring the developer would never look toward their county again. There was no dramatic courtroom battle, no public shouting match to entertain the masses. True power, Wyatt always understood, didn't need to be loud, it only needed to be absolute. Back in Harlo Creek, the news of Carter's formal retreat severed the final strings of Chloe Vance's political influence. Her alliance with the wealthy developer was exposed as a hollow, failed gamble. She sat alone in her office, staring at the county map, realizing she had to face the man she had tried to ruin. On a quiet Friday afternoon, Chloe Vance drove her SUV out to the Mercer property. She came completely alone, stripped of the board members and the developer who had fueled her arrogance. She parked at the front gate, leaving the car outside the boundary of his empire. She chose to walk the full length of the gravel lane herself. Every step she took was a physical reminder of the power dynamic she had so drastically misread. Wyatt was already waiting for her at the door of the sleek operations building. He knew she was coming. The perimeter cameras had tracked her arrival the moment she turned off the road. She stopped a few feet from him, standing in the shadow of the massive glass structure. She looked at him with the expression of a person who had rehearsed a speech 50 times. But looking at his absolute composure, she realized that any rehearsed excuse would be the wrong approach entirely. She abandoned her rehearsed justifications, deciding that the only honest version was the unrehearsed one. She looked straight into his dark eyes, stripping away the last remaining layers of her pride. "I was wrong," she said. 3 words, level and completely unambiguous. She added absolutely nothing to soften them, redirect them, or explain them away. Wyatt held her gaze for a long moment, taking the full measure of what those words had cost her.
I just hope you can forgive me.
In a town the size of Harlo Creek, a person's reputation is a structure they live in, whether they want to or not. He did not smile, and he did not claim a victor's prize. He simply nodded. "You can still run a good business here, Chloe," he said quietly, his voice cutting through the evening wind. "This town needs people like you, if you choose to stand in the right place."
I forgive you.
She held his gaze for a second longer, nodded once in silent understanding, and turned to walk back to her car. Late that same afternoon, Marcus drove the old pickup out to the far eastern field. Wyatt was standing at the edge of the crop line, watching the last automated run of the day. The boy parked along the field track, the truck's engine cutting out into the vast silence of the farm. He climbed out and walked over, his boots crunching softly against the dry earth. He stood beside his father without speaking, offering a quiet, mature solidarity. He didn't ask what they were looking at, because he already understood the magnitude of it. He had grown up watching this place become what it was, even if he hadn't always understood the full shape of the work.
I'm ready.
Now, standing shoulder to shoulder with the man who built it, the reality of their empire was undeniable. The sky began to turn orange and deep red at the horizon. It was the kind of Iowa sky that conspires with the open land to make the ordinary look like something that should be committed to memory. The 3 converted tractors moved in slow formation across the middle distance. They followed their programmed lines with the patient, unhurried certainty of machines given clear instructions. No engine sound carried over the wind at this distance. They operated in an almost ghostly silence. Father and son stood together in the last of the light, neither of them feeling the need to speak. There was nothing left that needed saying. The monumental scale of the work spoke for itself. People in Harlo Creek would tell the story of the 6 rusted tractors for a very long time. They would tell it with a particular enthusiasm, hiding the slight embarrassment of having been so completely wrong. But most of them would never fully understand what they had actually missed. It had not been a secret kept behind locked doors, nor a deliberate, malicious misdirection. What they had missed was simpler, and in some ways, much harder for them to reckon with. They had looked at a man's quiet economy of presence and assumed he was broken by grief. They had stood in a field of undeniable evidence and seen nothing but rust and failure. They had heard his stoic silence and foolishly translated it as an absence of thought. And the echo of their cruel laughter from that April morning would forever haunt their own memories. But Wyatt Mercer had never been angry with them. He had never needed their approval or their understanding. He had only ever needed the land, the raw materials, and the quiet hours of the night. He possessed the particular kind of patience that builds something undeniably real in the long, quiet dark. He built his empire long before anyone else in the world was ready to see it. The glowing lights of the operations center stood as a silent testament to that quiet revolution. And as the stars emerged over the massive, automated grid, his silent empire marched steadily forward.